Okay, so it looks like we've gotten a lot of people. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Welcome to AKINE's third virtual event, Peer 101. It is possible. We're so happy that you guys are able to join us tonight for this exciting conversation. While this event is free, any donations are greatly appreciated as well as accepted on our Cash App, AKINE 2020, and they're always appreciated. Hello, everybody. I'm Natalie Gomez. I am the BIPOC Caucus member of AKINE. I will be your facilitator for the evening, and I will be introducing the goals for the event. We will have a series of presentations centered upon unpacking what peer-led alternatives to policing are and how these alternatives are not only feasible, but help create a safer community. Panelists will lead us through a discussion that will aid us in starting to build a common language when talking about alternatives to policing and peer-led support. Conversation will be centered on articulating what is meant by systemic through a dialogue on the cultural and structural components that define the systems. This conversation is essential to understanding the ways in which the cultural parts of systems maintain the structural and will be the foundation needed for us to learn how to change. At the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity for audience members to ask questions through a guided dialogue. In respect for our moderator, panelists, and fellow attendees, we ask our audience to please adhere to our established norms. Be curious and respectful, be present, take care of your needs, commit to learning and action by being compelled to think beyond what is said, asking thoughtful questions, using these presentations to reflect and apply action steps for social justice, and thinking of how to form action steps in your life and your community. I'm excited for the following presentations and discussions. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing our first facilitator, Celeste Maria Isabel Clerk. Celeste is one of two co-directors for the Wild Ivy Social Justice Network and its Latinx Community Connector. Wild Ivy is a peer advocacy group within the Wildflower Alliance. Her advocacy work moves with an understanding that systemic oppression realizes itself in a feedback loop between cultural and structural spheres. Though her work moves the understanding the right of the well-being to a sense of life, liberty, possibility, and peace is a human right. That the United States is capable of achieving this in our lifetime, and that possibility and potential are grounded in collaborative work. Please continue, Celeste.
Hi, everyone. Well, I can't see you, but nice to share space with you, if even virtually. Thank you, Natalie, for that wonderful introduction. So my name is Celeste, and I will be your moderator for this evening. And I will be your moderator for this evening. I would love to begin by introducing our panelists, then moving into a very broad definition of peer support, which our panelists will each sort of help flesh out in definition and in practice. And then I'd love to move into our series of 4 framing questions, which I hope you will find interesting. So I'd love to begin by introducing Isabel Garcia, she, her, hers. So Isabel is a suicide awareness and social justice educator in Nipmuc and Pocumtuck land, known as Western Massachusetts. Pardon me, I'm not a Western Mass person. She uses her story of survival as a first-generation Dominican immigrant and psychiatric survival to dismantle myths about mental health and suicide in her community. Garcia is the founder of Estoy Aquí, and you can learn more about Estoy Aquí at www.estoy-aquí.org. Just FYI. An initiative that provides racial justice training, intergroup dialogue, and circle practice that highlight the social and cultural factors surrounding suicide in the Latino, Latinx, and the Black community. Her advocacy includes adapting peer support curriculum to Latin American audiences and promoting existing sources of culturally relevant mental health support. Thank you. The link to Estoy Aquí is in the chat, such as barbers, hairstylists, and school bus drivers to lower dependence on the criminal justice and mental health system. She has also been a part of organizing actions, including recording a national voting rights ad for Mi Familia Vota and co-moderating the Facebook presence of 413 Stay Woke, Stay Active, a Black woman-led movement of 8,000 plus members. So yes, please help me welcome Isabel Garcia. Our next panelist is Daryl Mcgraw, CEO and founder of Formerly Inc. Daryl is a community organizer, activist, and philanthropist. He serves on several boards involving re-entry and criminal justice reform in the state of Connecticut, including being the chair of the Police Transparency and Accountability Task Force, also in Connecticut. He consults with law enforcement, universities, policymakers, behavioral health and addiction treatment facilities who are looking to expand their knowledge and expertise in the area of criminal justice reform. He is an integral part of leadership decisions for these agencies and organizations. As a leadership consultant, Daryl inspires cultural competency and challenges organizations to move away from the status quo, all grounded in his lived experience. And last but not least, Sean Donovan with the Wildflower Alliance, who Wild Ivy, my program, is part of the Wildflower Alliance. So Sean uses he, him pronouns. Oh, thank you, link in the chat. Sean is a trainer for alternatives to suicide, when conversations turn to suicide, and intentional peer support trainings. He has presented at national conferences about these things and more. He brings his experiences as a queer man surviving suicidal thoughts and psychiatric hospitalization to his work as an advocate in these settings. Sean facilitates weekly alternatives to suicide and LGBTQI+ support groups, which please feel free to chat us if you would like to know the schedule. Our calendar for those alternative suicide groups is on our website, which was linked in the chat below. He also coordinates career initiatives, small business and creative project grants for folks with great ideas but fewer resources, and helps develop written and film advocacy resources. So yeah, before I move on to the framing points, would our panelists, Isabel, Daryl, and Sean, mind turning on their videos just to put a face to the name? In my Zoom, I can't see if it's happening.
We are here. We're in the building. Let's go.
Hi, Daryl. Welcome.
What's up?
It looks like we may be having some Zoom tech issues, but that's all right. We'll move it right along. I also noticed that you can't see my video. My video and my audio feed are split, but we'll sort that out as the panel moves forward. And yeah, but move it right along. Oh, I think you might be able to see me. Faces aren't that important. Okay, so can we, I'm gonna go ahead and start the framing of this discussion for AKINE with a broad definition of peer support that I'd like to offer. So peer support is a practice and a movement which approaches moments of crisis and difficulty as opportunities for growth. It rejects punitive systems of care and punishment as any kind of effective means towards the individual or the social good. The end goals of our peer support movement are not singular. There's no one goal. They are instead grounded in the shared and individual aspects of human connection that underlie disconnects between the internal and the external life, both in the way as is and as it could be. In relation to this particular topic and to alternatives to policing, our current responses to suffering and contentment are culturally and structurally married to policing. We softly police suffering when we hide the complex realities of our life from each other. We police suffering forcefully when we put people in distress or those who distress us away in psychiatric wards, in jails, in places that are seen and far removed from life with others, including from life with you. We expect this approach to work, and yet policing away difficulty, difference, historical shame, and the exploitation of BIPOC and immigrant communities does not work. Here we witness an increase in suffering and a total degradation of the potential of our society, of the social good, not just for one, but for all of us. So with that said, I would love to begin our discussion. So I throw the first question out to Isabel. How would you define peer support? How is your work related? And how does this connect to larger issues of policing?
Well, hi everyone. First of all, I want to say I'm so excited to be here. Especially I with the panelists and everyone. So, oof, how do I define peer support? That is a big question for me because I think I could speak for like maybe an hour about it, but I'm gonna be brief. Um, Peer support to me is really about building relationships, and I know that sounds super simple, but it's actually way more complex than that, as we know. Um, if you have tried adulting, then you know building relationships is not as easy as it seems. And I think peer support for me gives me, it's almost like a compass to me that kind of gives me direction or signs that make it easier for me to navigate not only talking about like mental health crisis or anything like that, but just, you know, caring for each other. Like, how do we care for each other? Right. And then I could, add more to that. One of the things that I love about peer support is about responsibility. Who takes responsibility for a problem, right? I am not there to take your problem away and solve it for you, right? It's about holding each other's pain and walking alongside each other. And I think that is just such a beautiful principle to have and to live by. That if I'm walking beside you, I don't pressure you to run. I don't, get in the middle or interrupt your walk. I meet you where you're at that moment. Um, the last thing I will say about peer support is that I like that I don't have to basically be cookie cutter. Like I could just say suicide. Like I could just say, I want to die. And if peer support is being truly applied in that situation, I know that a police officer, for instance, I know that a random wellness check is not going to be done on me because there is a sense of transparency and trust that is being built. So I know that was one question. And I know the next question is like, how is my work related to peer support? So everything I do is really peer support based. So like Celeste mentioned with my bio, I have this initiative called Estoy Aquí. And I provide, all of these different types of modalities like intergroup dialogue, racial justice training, circle practice. And basically, when I do those things, I am talking about suicide, right? All of these cultural and social factors. And then what do I speak about? I speak about community care and peer support as ways to basically take care of each other in times of very, very high, let's say, when there's very intense, when there's a lot of intense emotions, let's say it that way. So everything I do, from curriculum and all of that fancy stuff to who I am in my life, is really about peer support principles. And how does this connect to larger issues of policing? Well, peer support is definitely, to me, sounds like the most sense to use as an alternative to police, because peer support is also about systems. It's also about looking at the system from a justice and human rights lens, meaning that there is no this idea of coercion, this idea of pressuring you to do things that you don't want to do. Is a lot about dignity, right? Like, what is it that you need, right? We ask, what is it that you need, and how can we move forward together? And so that right there is against literally saying no to policing, because you're literally giving each other the choice to do what you think is best for you. So I could keep going, but I'm gonna shut up now.
Thank you, Isabel. That was beautiful and thorough. I would love now to toss that same question. How would you define, what's your definition of peer support? How is your work related to peer support? And how does that connect to larger issues of, policing? To Daryl.
All right, so right, in all honesty, I mean, never gonna be as good as Isabel was just now. So I may need you to repeat the questions as we go on, because I'm one of those guys in class, right? So, but I'm gonna start. For me, peer support is a gift, right? It's a gift that two people get to share, right? And it's a gift for me as a person in recovery, long-term recovery. The last time I used a substance was May 10th. The last time I used the substance was May 7th, 2007. That also means that's the last time I've been in the back of a police car or experienced trauma at the hands of police, right? Other than what I see visually secondhand, right? But it's also the gift that we get to give other people, right? Who are struggling, going through something, where that we have that platform of mutuality. I think, like Isabel was talking about, I started to get feeling where she was going with it, where we have this mutuality, we have this mutual stand, this connection. If anything, it's this connection that I can say, yo, I've been there. You know, I know what I know what you're feeling. We speak this certain language, if you will, of connection, that like when people see it, sometimes they don't even understand it, because you have to really be on that level to really understand when real peer work is done. Well, the beautiful thing about it, many of us have been doing it for years. We've been doing it in our communities, doing it in prison, doing it in the street when people are using. There's peer support going on at all levels. But then once you really understand and you start to perfect this craft, then you see how we use it as a strong tool in our toolbox to help our community, help our communities. Me personally, you know, the criminal justice reform movement is something that I'm strong about. And I feel like right now where we at, and everybody that's on this call, and I want to thank AKINE for inviting me, but I look at where we're at today is like the modern day Underground Railroad. We are pulling people out of darkness, right? Like, no doubt, like we're going back, and I got to a place where I found some recovery, I found some stability, and now I'm able to go back and get others. I didn't just turn my back and say, well, I got mine, you get yours. I went back into the field and said, yo, man, this is possible. This is here. And I will hold this space for you until you find some stable footing for yourself. What's the next question? What was the other question? I told you, I'm that guy in class, right?
No, this is wonderful. And I think actually that you already touched on it. You already answered it. But if you'd like to flesh the last part of the question out more,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So the last,
Give me
yeah.
the last question. Let's go.
Okay. How does this connect? So how does peer support relate to larger issues of policing?
Yeah, well, you know, so the larger issues of police, and one of the things that I do at Formerly Inc., and we do at Formerly Inc., and we could talk more about that, and in connection with C4, is that we do forensic peer support. So many people are recovery coaches, they're peer support staff, recovery specialists. But then when we talk about forensic peer support, we're actually teaching that craft. It's like being a doctor, but here you're a brain surgeon, right? You have a specialty. So now you learn how to connect with individuals that are justice involved or that are transferring out of the criminal justice system. Those of you, anybody that's on this call like myself that have been incarcerated, know one of the most difficult things that I've ever had to do was transition from prison back into the community. So that's this level of peer support where we're offering it to justice involved individuals, not only from returning, but that may be actively in contact with police, law enforcement, probation, parole, and we try to support those individuals so we can start to remove those systems like policing and so on and so forth. Because when you said this question, it made me think about the time that I had to go where my friend had a razor to his arm and the police were ready to go hands on, and I had 2 minutes to walk this guy out of the building. and they gave me that space, and it was simple. Bro, listen, you're going out of here. We're leaving. Either you and I walk out of here like men, or they're going to jump in here, and who knows what's going to happen. But in that split second, he understood we spoke a certain language, and I was able to walk him out of there safely and get him the help that he needs. That's where we are most useful, and we save lives like that. I could go on for days, like Isabel said. This is something that we're truly passionate about. I'm super excited to be here. Let's get it.
Thank you. I'm definitely not going to try and summarize anything that has been said so far, just because it was so rich and honestly so dense that to reduce it, I think, would be to reduce its nuance would be to reduce its very fundamental complexity. So I'm moving on now to, again, last but not least, Jean Donovan. I'm going to throw the same question to you that I presented to both Isabel and Daryl. So how would you define peer support? How is your work related? And how does this connect to larger issues of policing?
Yeah, thank you, Celeste. And thank you so much, Isabel and Daryl, for sharing this wisdom. And I also feel really honored to be here. So thank you, AKINE, or some people have said AKINE. I kind of like that pronunciation a lot too. Yeah, I've been sitting with this idea of like, what is peer support? And I've talked about this a lot the last decade. And I decided to like weave some new words tonight for what it is in a more simple way. And I'll share a story or two to kind of explain what I mean. But so for me, peer support is basically people with some shared experiences helping each other to get free, in whatever way freedom, is relevant to these people. And so I guess I was just trying to like come up with like what it feels like for me, rather than trying to like come up with a exhaustive definition. And I appreciate, Celeste, all the words you put out, and Isabel, all the words you put out, and Daryl, all the words you put down. That's amazing. But I guess to kind of clarify a little bit, when I think about peer support and the ways that I've experienced that, like people helping me or supporting me in moments, as well as me supporting others, like in locked wards, in homeless shelters, in support groups, just on the street, sometimes in people's homes. It's been about care without coercion, similar to what I think everyone else is saying, but it's also about, forging relationships without force. And I'm trying to use like alliteration, like FFCC, just because it's fun. But it's also about, reducing a power dynamic that can be, sort of like taking power over people. Because peer, as my friend and director of the Wildfire Alliance, Sarah Davidow, will say a lot, is about a relationship, as y'all have said too. Peer means like a relationship of equality. So while the peer movement and like peer support also implies that we perhaps have some shared experience of distress in the world, or being institutionalized, or being treated horribly by certain systems, it's also meaning like we're not trying to overpower each other in these relationships and make space for one another. And so that's, I guess, what peer support means to me, is like people with some shared experiences helping each other to get free. And I guess I did want to share a bit of a story about that. So there's so many people that I create community with. So it's hard to say like I do this alone, because I don't. And so I'm going to be naming other people like I did with Sarah. But one of my longest running accomplices in this work is named Caroline. And we've facilitated an Alternatives to Suicide peer support group in Northampton for a while. She no longer helps me with that, but does so many other things. But for about 6 years, we were holding this space with other people weekly, where people could talk about what was going on in their lives, about human distress, about what it's like to attempt suicide and wake up the next day and be committed to a hospital, about what it's like to go through so many institutions after a suicide attempt, and no one had even stopped to ask why someone wanted to die. We heard that story so much, and still do. But I remember one particular meeting. We were meeting on Christmas Eve. We don't really we don't really stop for holidays in this group, and not everyone is Christian, but it was a really powerful group because we were talking about being on the eve of things, or being on the verge of things. And sometimes people complete that sentence with like, I'm on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But someone was also saying, I don't know if I'm on the verge of a breakdown or a verge of discovery about myself. And in that meeting on like Christmas Eve, we were talking about what we're on the eve of. And because we let space for each other to talk out what our fears are, what we're gambling with in terms of wanting to live or wanting to die, like many people found themselves on the verge of discovery, self-discovery, and like other ways to get through. And I guess if we were coming to those conversations with force or coercion or an agenda to save someone, we might have pushed people to the verge of something far darker. And so I guess like what I'm trying to say by this is that peer support sometimes is like letting people have the space to not be forced into a decision, but we just hold that space for people. And oftentimes when people are held in that space, like they find a way through because they know. And so I guess that's something I wanted to share. Sorry, I could talk for an hour about this too, so I'm also trying to censor myself a bit. And Celeste, there's a second question, which I think I'm getting at, which is how is my work related? And how does peer support relate to the larger issue of policing? So I guess I'll just say for me, I think policing in terms of people that are actual police officers, but also sometimes social workers and people that are in professional roles where they're being asked to take power over others, they disrupt that process of being able to figure out what someone's on the verge of. And they already make a decision for someone to say, like, you're on the verge of something nefarious, or you're on the verge of something that you're going to hurt yourself or others. And sometimes people are disrupted and they're hurt and they're traumatized or sometimes killed through wellness or welfare checks. And so I just don't see the role of policing in these moments, you know, whether it's coming from police officers or mental health professionals, when we could have a lot of other options like that Isabel outlined, and Celeste and Daryl, where people who know what it's like to be in certain positions of disempowerment and pain often have more wisdom to draw upon to be there for someone in a moment. So like we don't need to de-escalate often because like we're already having connections with people that we know, you know, how to ask them questions or how to relate. So I feel like peer support is an antidote to a lot of the ways that policing has harmed people. And so I guess that's why I'm excited to be part of this conversation. And as someone who's survived suicide attempts and has a lot of suicidal thoughts, for me personally, you know, I know that I've been held a lot more through these moments by peer support than I have ever been in a psych ward where I have been, you know, occasionally. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. But I also just want to say too, yeah, I know that as a white person too, I probably have received lesser kinds of policing in my life. And so I'm hoping we'll have more time to talk about like the differences that we experience. But knowing the pain that I've had in institutions, like I know it's that much bigger for other people in my life that are non-white, people that are transgender. And so my understanding of peer support is just like using some of my experiences to connect with other people and making space for community care. So.
Thank you, Sean, and also thank you for sharing some of those genuine and vulnerable moments. So I'd actually like to frame our next question just very directly within the fear, right, that the stakes are suicide, that the stakes are death in terms of peer responses to mental health crises. So I'd like to frame this question, which is, what are some of the challenges in both your direct support practice and in its application to our community as a whole, within sort of that, the suggestion that so much of the forceful policing, not just in this arena, but outside of that, is based on a controlling behavior, perhaps guided by a certain degree of deep fear. So, what are some of the challenges in both your direct peer support practice and in its application to our community as a whole? I'm going to switch up the order a little bit and call Daryl.
Haha, you got me. Yeah, that's a I want to say dope and deep question at the same time, because when you think about it, like, you know, I go back to the brother George Floyd, who was murdered, and then his video was played over and over and over again, which stems from back in the slavery days. You know, when they used to kill slaves, they would leave them in the center of the town and let people watch, like, so as a warning to other slaves to not misbehave. And for me, as a Black person, seeing the killing over and over again is the same exact thing. It's the same exact thing. The lynching is the same exact thing. So for me, when we talk about this, And just to make a point why I bring that up is because a lot of people, you know, in this country saw what maybe looked like a guy that was fighting the police to, you know, not wanting to go to jail. But what I saw was a person, a person who struggled with substance use in distress, not wanting to detox in a jail cell. And anyone who ever is a heroin user and knows what it's like to detox in any point, and imagine to have to do that in jail. So I bring that up because there's so many different avenues that could have happened that day. Basic conversation like, George, what's going on? You know, why you fighting so hard, bro? You've been to jail before. This ain't your first rodeo. What's going on? And then George would have had the opportunity to articulate. See, I think Sean said it best. When this aggressive behavior happens, you remove the opportunity for individuals to express what's going on with them. You rob them of that. So not only are you robbing them of their freedom, robbing them of their life, you're robbing them from the opportunity to even ask for help, right? To explain what's going on, right? So that pain that we see sometimes is described as defiance, right? And that for me is lack of knowledge. And you know, even though this discussion is going one in a particular way, I feel like it's our duty to educate the masses on how it's important for those of us with lived experience who know how to articulate and train to be on the ground, training and teaching others how to deal with individuals who are suffering from pain. That's how people die. So those are the challenges that I see. I see the lack of knowledge and then the lack of willingness to bring in those with the knowledge to help. Because as the saying goes, people that are closest to the problem are closest to the solutions, but always furthest away from the resources.
Thank you, Daryl. I'm going to throw now the same question to Isabel. So the question again is, what are some of the challenges in both your direct peer support practice and in its application to our community as a whole?
Yeah. Again, I could talk about this for hours. So I'm going to try not to get into a rant because I'm telling you, I'm passionate about that. I think, so while educating people about, you know, peer support, and while applying peer support just in my personal life, I have noticed that there are many misconceptions and like taboos and things like that that get in the way of the connection we're talking about, the mutuality we're talking about that peer support provides. So for instance, the idea that if you're thinking about suicide, you're in crisis, the word crisis all the time. Are you safe? Are you not safe? And it's very black and white. Are you safe or not? Right? But the thing is, in my opinion, being suicidal is not always a crisis. To be honest, I want to die almost every day. And to me, that makes sense. I'm like, hello, I live in the United States. Like, of course I want to die. So for me, that's like, whatever. My mom and I even, we talk about it all the time. Why? Because I have normalized this conversation with my mother that I do want to die. And, you know, I'm trying my best to live a happy life. So, but the thing is, how do you have those conversations with the community? Well, if we keep having these taboos, I don't see how we can. Like, we have to, that's why we have to talk about it openly. Like, what is mental health? What is suicide and all of these things? Because when I think about peer support, I also think about bravery and about transparency. Because again, I'm literally openly saying that I want to die, right? And that for many people is like, yeah, let's call 911. Like, what's her? Some of you might be thinking about that. Don't do that. And why? Because that's like a response. That's like literally one of the first responses that comes to mind, because there is this idea that one, the professional knows better. All the time it comes up in all my trainings, in all of my discussions. Well, let's get you the hotline number. Let's get you help, right? But what do you mean, let's get you help? Help can happen right here between us. But there's this idea again of the professional that gets in the way. I noticed that some people who are part of the system, like I was involuntarily hospitalized 4 times in less than a year. 2 weeks after I moved to the US, I was already in a psychiatric hospital because the cultural shock was so big that I couldn't handle it. My body and mind and soul couldn't handle it. So, you know, I have experienced police coming, knocking on my door with their guns and everything. And I'm like, oh, okay. My parents having threatened with foster care and all of these things, even though they're great parents and they have never neglected me. So trust me when I tell you that I know what it's like to be part of the system. I have had 10 different therapists, like not because I wanted to switch therapists, but because they kept quitting. And so they kept switching me from one to another. And I could speak forever about all of the inequities I have experienced in the system. But what I'm trying to say is that there are people who are inside the system who are used to this helper client relationship, and they're stuck on that. Like, no, tell me what to do. No, like, tell me what to do. You know better. You have this degree. Tell me what to do. And then there are people who are stuck in the helper role of, yes, I know what to do and I will tell you what to do. Now do yoga 3 times a week. You got it. Drink that water. Woo! Police brutality will go away with that yoga, right? Anyhow, that was sarcasm. But I could speak about this forever. But honestly, the biggest challenge is the fear that many people get. And I am not going to demonize people for having fear. Okay, I'm not gonna demonize people from feeling like, holy crap, you're saying you want to die, you're saying you're having a panic attack, what do I do, right? You know, what if you die and I didn't do anything? And then there's that guilt. So I'm not demonizing people for that. But so how do we move forward from that fear? Because that fear is what's killing people. Those are the people who call 911 when the ambulance comes in and then the police comes in. These social workers are the ones calling 911 because, by the way, mental health and the criminal justice systems are the same crap. Just putting that out there. It's the same thing. Lastly, I swear I'm gonna shut up. I think peer support is outside the box. I really do. I was, believe it or not, I was a child psychology major. Yes, I have a degree in child psychology. And oh my God, anyhow. And when I compare it, I also did an internship at crisis services. Trust me, I have been there, I know. And peer support is really creative. And I don't think a lot of people are ready to be that creative. Like, for instance, one of the questions that I ask myself when I am like really suicidal is, what is the last thing you want to do before you die, right? And I learned that from the Alternatives to Suicide approach, which Sean and Caroline trained me on it. Fun fact.
Why do you have my license?
Yeah. I learned to ask myself what you want to do before you die, and that has saved me a ton of times. So, but asking that question is not gonna be the easiest for many people. So again, I think that creativity it's hard for me to introduce that creativity, that outside the box thinking to people, especially in my community, the Latinx community, in another language. That's really hard to translate all of these ideas and values.
Thank you, Isabel. So I would like to now throw this very rich, dense question to Sean. So Sean, would you like to comment too on some of the poignant points that both Daryl and Isabel brought up when when answering the question, what are some of the challenges in both your direct peer support practice and in its application to our community as a whole?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Isabel. That's some fiery stuff y'all putting out, and I appreciate it. And also, I just want to say, Daryl, I love your shirt. I'm thinking about a song from the album Purple Rain, "Let's Go Crazy." I just had to say that. It's been in my head.
Yeah, let's go, man. Sean, it's good to see you, bro. You know what? I didn't connect. It was a long drive, man. 13 hours, but it's good to see you, brother. So much.
Good to see you too. Yeah, and I'm doing a lot of weird trainings online now, and so I play music during breaks, which I've learned from other trainers, and I play that song every training.
Yep.
And the reason I play is because my mom used to play it on a record player when I was a kid, and I used to dance to it. And now that I'm 34, I'm like, yeah, why not go crazy? Because the world has a lot to feel crazy about.
Absolutely, and that
So,
connection to music, I really appreciate that.
Appreciate your shirt, appreciate Prince, appreciate you, and yeah. But I was thinking also, so I wanted to bring it from the pop music to the big picture and then to the small picture. But about this question about like what's hard in peer support on a big level, small level. But another reason that it's hard to live in this country and why I want to die often because of living in the United States is because our country doesn't really value human rights as many others do. And one of the things that's kind of a paradox, I can't quite make sense of it, is that we host the United Nations on our soil, so to speak, and we don't really follow a lot of the greater things that the United Nations puts out there about human rights and about the rights of people with disabilities. And one of the things that the United Nations published a few years ago, you can check it out. I think it's by the Special Rapporteur, Danius Peras. He wrote that the crisis of so-called mental health in the world is less about chemical imbalance and more about power imbalances. And I think that says a lot. And if we take that to be true, what can we open up about what's possible in supporting people? So I want to talk about that on the micro scale now. So like, I'll say for myself, I'm someone who has experienced like suicide attempts, suicidal thoughts, a lot of big feelings in the world. And for a lot of my life, those feelings were taken out of their context. And I was told that I was mentally ill. I was told I was majorly depressed. And then I was told I had bipolar disorder. I was given all this reasoning that some, dopaminergic and serotonergic firing was off, and that I needed to take psych drugs for that. And I'm not saying to anyone like take your drugs or don't take drugs. That's all up to you. Please make those decisions for yourself, like an informed person. But for me, I think so much of the emphasis on responding to distress in this world is like put on chemical imbalances in people's minds. So individuating the problem instead of saying, what is the bigger context here? Why do people want to die? Maybe it's because the United States doesn't respect human rights. And maybe it's because, like this country allows continued systemic oppression and doesn't acknowledge genocide, all this stuff, we could go on. But oftentimes like professionals and the mental health system and possibly the prison system too, they locate problems in people's minds and people's brains rather than saying, maybe it's the way we're treating people. Maybe it's the way that we don't have housing as a human right. Maybe it's the way in which some people are treated worse by the police and other authorities than others. And so I just think there's like a lot that gets missed when our conversation around mental illness or mental health, even though those are imperfect terms too in my mind, gets located in individual people's brains when it's about relationships and it's about what people aren't getting in their lives that they should be getting. And for me, that that touched on like just not getting the space to be a queer person when I was trying to come out in the world, where I felt like being myself was putting myself at risk, where I grew up in rural New Jersey. I know for all of us, we probably have these moments where we feel like who we need to be and want to be doesn't fit in the world that we're in because we're not getting the support we need. So yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers to the community response as a whole is that like a lot gets put in terms of individual people rather than the systems that aren't serving them and how we could change that. That's a big barrier. I will also echo some of what Isabel said, where I just think there's a real issue with like people not either knowing they have the skills to support their friends and their family and their people in their community, or people not having the willingness. I just don't know sometimes. But like one of the things that irks me so much is that when any like media source is publishing anything related to suicide, they publish that National Suicide Prevention Hotline as if that is the panacea for everybody's pain. And let me tell you, I know a lot of people who have called that line and then they've had the police called and the police ended up at their house. And so that is not a panacea. In fact, it creates more problems for some people. If you've gotten support through that line, I'm really happy. That's great. I'm not discounting that experience. But there are places like the Trans Lifeline, which is like specifically for trans folks, but anyone who calls, I think they'll pick it up. And they have been explicitly not working with the police from the start. So I want to give them big props for that. Please support their work if you can. And so I just wish that we would have a better national standard of saying, if someone's talking about suicide, talk to them like a person that gives a fuck. Sorry for cursing, but I get really heated about this. Like ask someone why. Or like, you know, maybe like take a moment and, you know, offer what you can to them rather than just like shuttling someone off to a professional, or worse yet, calling the cops and doing a welfare check or wellness check. That's, as we know, for people that are checking in on the media these days, like that is deadly, especially for Black folks, Indigenous folks, for people of color, and particularly for folks that are disabled in some way or, you know, have mental illness labels. And so I guess like one of the biggest barriers to me, like just to kind of repeat what Isabel said, doing the creative work that I do is a lot of oppressive institutions that everyday citizens help to uphold. So I guess like I'm really grateful for the work that we all do to kind of raise awareness that like people have what they need to support each other. They have to just be willing to try. And so the other thing I'll just say, and then I'll shut up, is that I think when we put so much emphasis on this sort of internal chemical imbalance to kind of figure out why people are distressed, we can so easily not take responsibility for our communities and for our friends, because we can say, well, I'm not a professional. I don't know how to deal with serotonin. But oftentimes, at least in my experience, like what I needed from people was not like a recommendation to a psychiatrist or whatever, or someone calling the crisis center. I needed someone to listen. I needed someone to validate that I was in pain and that I, even though I might not be fun in a moment, that I belonged in a relationship. I'm getting that a lot more these days with peer support, which is amazing. But I just wish that people could think more about what they can do for each other. I don't want to wait for the government to change their policies and shit, to be honest. And I'm so hoping that things do change in Western Mass when it comes to policing. But I think we have what we need sometimes in our own communities. We just need to be given the permission to have these conversations. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm getting sweaty. That's all for now. Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. I definitely relate to sweating a lot when talking really fast. All right, so let's move along right to our next question. So this next question is, can you describe why we need alternatives to policing, both in the sort of macro level and in the individual level, in the ways in which we police each other? If you could also please take a moment to go into what are the consequences of policing and why does peer support represent a possible alternative? I call Isabel.
I'm gonna try to be as concise as possible. I'm telling you, this is hard. Okay. we need, okay, so this is I guess this is what I will say directly. We need alternatives to policing to stop the system from working the way it is supposed to be working. And I know that sounds really weird because it's like, what are you talking about? The system is broken. And I realized a couple of years ago, it's not broken. It's working exactly the way it's supposed to. It's supposed to kill people of color. I know that sounds really hard. I know that sounds really messed up, but it is meant to kill us. In all, by the way, no, I'm not only talking about murder, like physically. I'm talking about mentally, spiritually. It's meant to kill us. Point blank. Capitalism, white supremacy, like I'm telling you, it's meant to kill us. So it's working just fine. Especially if you look at suicide rates and all of this thing. It's working perfectly. So why do we need the alternatives to policing? Because that's, I think, one of the ways to stop the system from working in the way that it's working, right? I think that one thing that I would like to talk to my community more about is about policing as an environmental health issue. And I'm not only talking about air pollution, because actually that's a real thing, right? Because if you are living in a neighborhood where police cars are always going around, you're obviously, we are going to have more air pollution, and then all these sirens and stuff. That's also part of environmental health. So that's real. But I'm not only talking about that, I guess the obvious aspect of environmental health. I'm talking about the fact that my mom she cannot get out of the apartment without looking 30 times outside the window like this. She's like, did you hear that? Did you hear that? Who's that? Who's that? Who just moved? Do you know who moved? Literally, my mother is scared for her life at all times where she lives, because we live in the projects. So the bad side of Springfield. And so my mom basically lives her life thinking, one, someone might shoot me when I get out of the house to do groceries. Two, my child might also, again, die in a shooting. Or so she comes up with because it's valid. Her fears are valid. She is being basically training her brain to basically see the world in that way. Why? Because she sees the news, right? So again, and she sees the police cars all the time doing rounds. So I think talking about that, like the environmental piece of it, like looking, like just the presence of a police car makes my heart race. And I get like, my hands start shaking. I get like, it's like I'm gonna have a panic attack. And then when I'm driving with someone and then someone stop, I always look like this to see if the person is like Black. Because I'm like, okay, how do they look? How do they look like? Because if they were Black, right? If they appear Black, hell yes, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna record all of that, because I took that training where you have to say the date and everything. I'm ready. But the fact, why do I have to do that? I have to live in this country and train myself. So every time that I pass like a cop car, I have to be like, okay, if this person is Black, is a Black man, a Black woman, or whatever, okay, Asian, etc. Okay, these are the things I have to say when I'm recording. I'm always prepared. What does that do to your body, to your soul and mind? Again, so that's just talking about policing as an environmental health issue, looking at the uniform does to my body, how it reacts, literally reacts. I think all of that, we should be talking more about how that affects our mental health. And I guess, why does peer support represent like an alternative? I think that's the last question. Well, basically, and I think Sean and Daryl already spoke about about this, but because peer support is, again, not about coercion, right? It's not about necessarily like telling you what to do, or this whole thing about I know better. I know you better than you do. um and installation was talking about that power dynamic. I think really, when I think about it, the power dynamic is what's killing us as well. Who has the power, who hasn't? And I think peer support is one approach to, at least get us through that. I could speak about this forever. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Let's see, what else can I say? Yeah. We just need peer support because it's about human rights, people. It's I think it's that simple. It's about human rights. It really is.
Thank you, Isabel, especially for bringing in a consideration like the environmental health issue, to think of the sort of internal ecosystem and how that's deeply affected by living in a society in which there is a constant watchfulness, a constant punitive response to any kind of deviation from the norm. And that norm, of course, that we're talking about here is necessary to explicitly state as white supremacy and the inherent sort of white culture, both in progressive and in less progressive spaces, the norms that are present there. So I'd love to now throw this question to Daryl. So the question again is, can you describe why we need alternatives to policing? What are the consequences of that policing, and why does peer support represent a possible alternative? I know that through this discussion, we've touched upon various of these points a couple of times. So yeah, please feel free to choose that which is most pressing to you now.
No doubt. I really appreciate it. And, I felt like Isabel was like looking in my window or something. I don't know if she's an ATL or what, but because she said a lot of the things that I was talking about. The alternatives, because people are dying. Let's just be clear. Let's call it for what it is. People are dying. And when you said it, I was thinking the same thing, man. Listen, we're not just talking about physical death. We're talking about the mental. We're talking about people who are being killed by design. This is by design that, these systems are created to break people, right? So there's that foundation of slavery and bringing it to the criminal justice system and seeing how people are designed to be broken, and hundreds of years of these systems just continuously breaking people and with no repair in sight, right? So there's no we break them and just keep them going, and that's so other systems can thrive. We have to really do the math. And this is a deep conversation. Celeste, you and Liz, y'all didn't tell me we was going to go this deep, man. I thought we was just going to chop it up a little bit. I didn't really know where we was going, right? And then, so I think about that, and I think about how these systems are designed for like control, right? And that whole purpose of control. When we see policing, it's about control and power and all of these different things. But under that, people are being broken, and that is just crazy, and suffer. One of the things that both of my colleagues talked about was wanting to die. And I don't have that luxury because I walk around similar to Isabel's mother in the fear of being killed, right? So I walk around in this space that not knowing if I am going to walk out the house, am I going to return? You see, that's a reality. That is a reality that, there's no guarantee. You know how you can guarantee a lot of things? That's one thing I can't guarantee, right? The likelihood of being killed by a police officer is very real, very real. So suicide and thinking, nah, I'm just trying to live. I'm trying to dodge the bullets. I don't have time to think about taking my own life. I'm trying to keep him from killing me. Y'all see what I'm saying? So with that saying, when we look at it from that lens, we are saying that like policing and I know some people that are cool, I got some friends, few that are police officers that think differently, but for the greater scope, what we're seeing is policing is almost like agents of death, right? Like they're working in this scope where people are dying. People are dying at the hands of that profession. And if that's the case, then peer support, we have to be agents of life, right? We got to be the agents of life. We have to be offering ways to live differently, more powerful, not just surviving, thriving. Come on, man. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Really living. So we have work to do just like they have work to do. So we have to constantly be on our job 24/7. This job don't stop at 9 to 5. Peer work doesn't start at 9 to 5, and it's not a spectator sport, right? We're constantly on the job looking to help and help others to see the light and live. So that's what we're doing, man. That's where we at, man. I really appreciate the human rights perspective, because I was talking to a friend today and really focusing on how all of the work that we do encompasses human rights. And I think as peers, we need to continue the narrative of speaking more and more of how all of this affects human rights and get to a different platform, because it's not just peer work anymore. It's not just this. We really need to be talking about human rights from a bigger perspective, because that's what's being violated on a daily basis. Yeah, let's get it. Let's go.
Thank you, Daryl.
Yep.
So I'd like to move on to the very last questions, because I see some questions coming in on the chat, and I would love to have an opportunity for our panelists to answer some of the questions that are coming in through the chat directly. So I'll start the last question. I'll first point to you, Sean. So what is the underlying ideal potential of peer support as a principle for our society? And what kind of community is possible through these principles?
Yeah, so Isabel and Daryl, just hearing you talk, thank you for sharing all that, first of all. I'm just like sitting with like a lot of big feelings right now, and I just want to name that. And I was thinking about also like why AKINE exists, why we're having this conversation, why people are actually listening. And I'm thinking about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade and Ahmaud Arbery, and there's so many other names I could name, but I'm just thinking about that time last year where I don't know, people started to listen, and it took a damn like lynching video to make that happen. And anyway, just I can go on and on, but I guess what I just wanted to sit with too is that I don't know, like I'm in these conversations not just because I want to keep like Black folks and Latinx folks and people of color and Indigenous folks alive. I want people to feel joy. I want people to feel like there's a life worth living here. And I know going back to the UN, like they have some ideas about how human rights also includes like living a life that has purpose and meaning. And so I don't want our movement to, I guess, hold the police state accountable and offer other things. Just start with that basic and stay there about just like keeping people alive. Like, how about giving people opportunity to feel like purposeful and like held and cared for, and where there's more possibility. So I guess I'm sharing all that just because I felt moved to, and just to call some of the names into this space that feels like we wouldn't be having this conversation if people hadn't both responded to these things, and we had a mass movement last year which I hope will continue, where people took to the streets, etc. I think of peer support as a trapdoor out of all these oppressive systems. Like, honestly, I do. Like, I can think of times in the community centers that I've been a part of through the Wildflower Alliance where we did have conflict come up, where people got into a fist fight or there was a threat of violence. And because we had a relationship with people that we weren't trying to take power over, we were able to hold that space together and not call the police in most instances. I think almost all that I've been a part of. I remember one time when 4 people got into a fist fight in our space, and it made some people really upset for sure. But I knew them. I knew I could put my body in there and they wouldn't hurt me that much. And I made a choice to step in. And because we knew them, we could say, you know, like, we're not going to call the police, but this can't happen here. So like, you value this space, right? So like, what are we going to do with this? And so we were able to figure out, because we were practicing peer support, kind of like Daryl said, like, not just in these crisis moments, but like all the time. Like we're making relationships with people, like in these community centers, which are like no or low barrier. Like you don't have to be part of a program. You don't have to like give away some of your rights to get some care or to get some recognition or belonging. Like you can just show up. And I think we need more spaces like that in our communities where people can just appear. They don't have to pay for a coffee. They don't have to enroll in services, but they can just be part of something. And so I really think in all these conversations where we're talking about alternatives to the police, I want to put the lens like a little bit wider and say that it's not just about these fever pitch moments that we need to rethink our values. It's like the bigger picture. Like I couldn't have stepped into that situation of conflict in the way that I did if I didn't know those people, if I didn't know some of their hurts and grief, and that some of them have been locked up in prison before, and I didn't want them to go back there. You know, we all made choices not to call police for all these reasons, and because we've been harmed by police too. So I think, I don't know, I guess I'm just thinking about like how in our relationships with peer support are we making space for people to be vulnerable? How are we making space for people to say they want to die because the world isn't what they need it to be? And how can we fight to make that world the world we need for each other? And I guess like that's something I'm thinking about too. So having spaces where people can just show up and be themselves without the threat of being put into institutions or being disrespected in whatever way. So that's what I'm thinking right now. That peers, it's not just about alternatives to policing in these moments, but it's about like how to give people more space to be who they need to be in all these moments. So
Beautiful. Thank you, Sean, and especially for expanding that framework into suggesting that peer support and the values of peer support, that genuine human connection, that curiosity, that community, vulnerability, and validation of that suffering, the realities of that suffering, extend far beyond the sort of contained moments of crisis and into practices that can happen throughout the day with people, and which build up over time, but are primarily situated in responses to the present. Yeah, so I would love to now throw this question. What is the underlying ideal potential of peer support as a principle for society, and what kind of community is possible through these principles? To Daryl.
I'm going to ask you to repeat that again, too. Only because it was good, and I just like to hear you say it again.
I will do it again.
Cool.
So the question, which is our last question before we begin answering some of the questions directly from our audience that came in through the chat, is what is that underlying ideal potential of peer support as a principle for our society? And what kind of community is possible through these principles?
Oh, no, yeah, I appreciate it. It's just, it goes back to what everyone was saying. And for me, it's about humanity, right? Humanity and respect, right? And treating individuals as humans, like from all aspects and all fronts. That's the one piece that we're missing, right? Somewhere along the line, there was some disconnect, that there's some hierarchy that exists, that I'm better than you because of the shade of your skin. No other reason, not that you're faster, bigger, got more money, just because you look like that and I look like this, I'm better than you. So now these systems exist, and people continuously, mistreat individuals based off of their appearance, right? And, when I do presentations, I talk about the iceberg, how so much more is under the water level than what's above. And I think that for us in communities, and what I'm trying to build in my communities is, a sense of, humanity, man. If nothing else, man, just treat people as human beings, man. You treat people as you want to be treated. And that's like a principle that we need to all be following, right? And I know it sounds good, and you see people saying, oh, we're all alike. No. We need to take a deeper dive in understanding that when I say treating humans as humans, when you see someone being mistreated and you are in a position of power because of how you look, you need to use that power to defend that other individual, because that's what humans do.
Thank you, Daryl. And now, Isabel, would you like to answer this last question yeah, I'll be asking before we move into questions from the chat. So that question one more time is, what is the underlying ideal potential of peer support as a principle for our society? And what kind of community is possible through these principles?
So peer support as a principle for society. I think about, I love this, looking for the untold story or listening for the untold story. Like, what are people really saying when they say they're depressed or they're suicidal or they're anxious, right? And like this value of curiosity is, I love the value of curiosity that peer support provides, because it literally pushes you to, like, in a good way, it pushes you to really ask questions instead of assuming things. So I would love for society to really, apply this idea of, oh, I wonder what is your untold story. What am I not getting? What am I not receiving from what you're telling me? And I'm gonna ask questions with consent, of course, and work together to figure this out, right? I also believe peer support, if we talk about peer support from a human rights perspective, then I think it also works for, reframing accountability. In this country, there is a lot of emphasis on individual accountability. So if I feel like crap today, it's my fault. Because I didn't get enough sleep, I didn't eat what I had to eat, instead of saying, hey, I probably am being exploited by my employer because I'm working more than 40 hours a week. Whose fault is it that I don't have time to sleep and eat? So I think peer support, if we look at it from the human rights perspective, can be used to go from that individual accountability thing to systemic accountability. Who is really the problem here? What exactly is the problem here? And for me, when I ask a question, it literally always goes to capitalism, but I'm not gonna get into that. Don't worry about it. That's a rant. That's a whole nother panel. Capitalism, right? But just to finish, what kind of community is possible? I have this dream that I'm finally going to realize this July, and I might talk about it a little bit more like later after the Q&A. But basically, I believe that we have what it takes. Like Sean was saying, we have what it takes, especially in the Latinx and Black communities. We have the barbers, we have the hairstylists. These are people who are having to do mental health work for forever, and also they're activists, by the way. If you don't know the history about barbershops in the civil rights movement, please read or something. I don't know. Anyhow, especially in the Dominican Republic, hairstylists are heroes. We care a lot about her. But also, which is a problem on it itself, but these are legit sources of support that the mental health field, I don't think they recognize. There is a barber movement going on that I'm like, yay, but I wish there were more push, for recognizing these sources that already exist. They already exist, having a system forever. Like school bus drivers, for instance. There are mental health advocates, but they're not recognized that way. So one of my goals to reach that ideal society, right, is to have dialogues with people. Let's work. What do you think? What is suicide to you? What does that mean? Let's talk about it. Because they're already doing the work. It's about finding common ground and moving forward together.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Sean, for taking the time to answer our four primary questions, or four structuring questions, ranging from peer support in the direct sort of day-to-day practice to peer support as principles that extend towards the building of a different kind of a society, while also addressing some of the issues that exist in our current system. So I would love to pick, so in reading the many questions that came through the chat, there were three primary areas of questions. One area was on details of peer support practice, including questions about harm reduction, including questions about vicarious trauma, including questions of how the peer support as something that has to work within the system currently navigate that clash of approach and principle. We had questions too on the nature of what is policing, including ways in which social workers take on roles like cops, and questions too about how the parallels between sectioning people under Section 12s and psychiatric holds, and how that relates or mimics in parallel to cop behavior. We also have big general questions on alternatives, to ranging from hotlines that don't use police to how do we push this to be more mainstream, so that it becomes more of a new norm, though not normative. And questions too about how this alternative is funded and how that funding can come with strings attached, and how, right, peer support can, as a movement, can navigate those strings. So I would love to ask our panelists if they have any area of question which they would like to answer a question from.
That was a lot, man. That was a grocery list. That was a grocery list. That was a lot. I think that, and those are great questions, and I appreciate everyone that stuck around and stayed. I love the questions that you asked, Celeste, about like the community and what the community looks like. I kind of like didn't really just focus really on that. I love what Isabel said, and Sean too. I love, this is a great panel where we talk about what does that community look like. We already live in these communities. They may be small or large, but we function in these worlds. But how do we bring it to the masses, right? How do we bring it out more? I think one of the people in chat was talking about that. It's understanding your role. Number one, your role as a human being, and understanding if you consider yourself being a part of this movement, then how can you help others that are in the community that are struggling? Because some people walk past people struggling every day. They see it, but it's not their problem, or they don't know how to help. I hear it all the time. Well, I don't know how to help. I don't know how to, and just in the racial equity lens, just going to the Black Lives Matter marches is not good enough anymore. Right? We really need you to buying a sign and putting it on your front lawn. That's not good enough anymore. You need to, whatever your power is. I don't care if you're a baker, then let's bake some cakes and get people together in a room. Whatever it is, we need to come together, because we are way stronger together than we are apart. And yet we have these talks, and it's like over 50 people. But what's the movement? We're going to have a call to action, and we should see all 50, if not 100, being ready to mobilize and move to our next step, so we can show that this thing works.
I would love to interrupt for one hot second. Thank you so much, Daryl, and mention that in the email after this event. If you registered for this event, you will receive a legal fact sheet of this bill in the Senate 1567 that presents an alternative to police response in moments of quote unquote mental health crisis, and which outlines a different approach that includes peer support, peers, as well as mostly reduction of any kind of law enforcement. We are not there. This bill is not there to the point where it absolutely bars them. I don't know how to get there, but it's absolutely one beautiful thing that's coming up right now. The sitting body, the commission appointed by the governor that will determine what this looks like as part of the 988 behavioral health crisis hotline, which is in the works to be basically an emergency dispatch, but without police involvement line, to take those, to respond to those moments. While the bill is not perfect, I highly encourage folks to open the email that you receive after this presentation and, do good on some of what Daryl just mentioned, to take a look at some of the legislation, some of the action items that are coming up right now.
Right.
And if you decide that you would like to be in support of this bill, we are offering an email letter template to send to your legislator in support of this initiative.
Right. And that's just to add to that, like, that's the work. That's the work, putting in the work, like understanding what the bills are, understanding, how your voice can help, being part of the movement is so key. Like, I love that. I love where we're going with this, and just excited to be a part of the process, because there's somebody sitting in a cell right now. There's somebody being mistreated. And if we don't, through this work that we do, we can start saving more and more lives, that we don't have to see people get murdered by public servants anymore.
Yeah, this is Sean. I wanted to jump in if I could. I see that there's some questions about harm reduction too. And I definitely wanted to speak to that in a couple different ways. And yeah, so totally, Celeste, thank you so much for putting out that information about like legislation. And yeah, I think the term harm reduction has gotten quite trendy, and it's great because more people are thinking about like how to create less barriers for folks to get through their lives. But harm reduction really began with like sex workers and drug users and a lot of people of color that were at the root of that. And I think sometimes the public health departments in Massachusetts and otherwise use that terminology without knowing what it actually is. And so there are some people locally that I think are practicing that in some awesome ways, like HRH 413. There's the New England Drug Users Union, different organizations that you could support that are actually holding down these values. But I'll say for me, harm reduction is about like taking away, criminalizing things that people do to survive. And also giving people the tools that they need to not have the way that they're surviving kill them. And so sometimes that's looking like, how people that are using drugs intravenously can get safe supplies and needle exchanges. Like there's a lot of those in Western Mass through a lot of people pushing for that to happen. But I also think about harm reduction in terms of how peer support can be practiced well. Like sometimes it's harm reduction about keeping the systems out of our conversations. So we're funded, Wildflower Alliance is funded by the Department of Mental Health in part. I'm really grateful that we have consistent funding for that. But sometimes we have to say you can't get involved in our conversations because that will screw up our ability to connect with people. Sometimes we actually call out the Department of Mental Health for their practices when they harm people in certain ways. So when I think about harm reduction, I also think about how are we allowing ourselves to be our best creative selves in peer support without getting interventions like asking us to write notes on people or asking people in peer support roles to coerce people into taking medication. That's not peer support. And so I also think harm reduction is how can we keep the harmful institutions out of our lives? And so that's another thing I just wanted to share. And there's a question about vicarious trauma and healing from things. And I've heard people share a lot of rough stories about their lives. And honestly, what gets me through that is peer support. It's having people that I can talk to about how I'm feeling. And so sometimes it takes, I'm a trainer for the intentional peer support way of thinking, which talks about co-reflection, like times where you can come together with people that are also putting their lives on the line to support others and just talk about what's coming up for you. What is your process of healing from your own story and trauma? And so some of that is peer support. Some of us also use traditional therapy and other stuff. That's fine. That's great. But I think peer support can actually be its own kind of healing vessel when I talk about alternatives to suicide groups, that's a place that I find healing too. Even though I facilitate, like I share my own pain there, and I'm able to be held in that as well. And so I don't want people to think that peer support is like something we're doing to others and then things are being done to us. Sometimes it can feel like we're taking on a lot or we're holding a lot, or for me, but oftentimes peer support is also the antidote to the vicarious trauma. Like sometimes we seek out other things. Like I know how to find a better therapist now that's going to respect me because of peer support. So I actually do get clinical support, but you know, I have people to have my back, you know, that aren't clinicians too, a lot of people. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to speak to those different pieces. And I'm not really sure how much longer are we going as a crew. Just wanted to check in.
I was under the impression that we're ending at 8:30, so we are about 4 minutes over, and I was just about to move us over into final comments, final thoughts, just out of respect for everyone's time here. So yeah, I'd love to open it up to our panelists to sort of give away a couple final takeaways. I'm gonna call on you guys if you don't say anything.
We were late. We were gonna do like ladies first, man. You know, we was thinking that, you know, Isabel was gonna drop some jewels or whatever, unless she wants to drop the mic. And if that's the case, I could go. I don't mind. I think about, for me, first of all, thank you for just being on the panel and having me on the panel. But I think for me, it's always about the pebbles and the boulders. Boulders are the things that we can see. They're the large things that, you know, we can see and we can navigate around them. But it's the pebbles that continuously trip us up, right? It's the small things that we don't see or that we overlook that keeps us tripping up. And I think for us, for me, and in this movement, it's really about, you know, enlightening people to how easy it is to slip on those pebbles and trip and you know, and for some of those people, that slip and fall could end up, you know, they end up dead or in prison. So the work that we do is super important. Peer work is like, you know, is my life's blood. I wake up every day looking for like, yo, who you got for me today? God, anybody, let's go. It might be at the gas station, it could be anywhere. And I'm always looking to be that person that, you know, even if it's just a kind word or what have you. So I think that, you know, and we all do it, but recognizing how we do it and the level that we do it, but more so, even so, as like you see tonight, coming together and we're making it more so of a movement. So we have a web so that we're doing it at a higher level and really moving it into the human rights lens. So I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, Daryl. Would Sean or Isabel like to share some final takeaways?
Yes. We got what it takes to take care of each other. And I think human rights and social justice are about imagination. And so let's imagine what we want to see, what is possible. And, you know, let's work towards it together. I'm pretty sure, again, when the civil rights movement, all of these different movements were happening, I'm pretty sure many people in the community were like, that's not going to happen, Joe. I don't know what you're thinking. You're just wasting your time. And look, so I think, you know, I look back those examples, those movements, and then I look here now, and, you know, I hear people say that's never going to defunding the police. What? Girl, please. But when I think about what makes life worth living, I think about imagination. I do. I think it's what is keeping me alive. So I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, this is Sean, and yeah, thank you, Daryl and Isabel and Celeste and AKINE for hosting this whole event. And yeah, I've really been finding a lot of resources in my imagination and our collective imagination too. So Isabel, I appreciate you naming that. And also, yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to some of the stuff that Wildflower Alliance is hosting in the near future, because sometimes people need a little help with imagination. That's okay. um, but there's also, you know, in addition to Wildflower Alliance, like check out the work that Daryl's doing and Estoy Aquí that Isabel's doing, holding down. And with Wildflower Alliance, we try to offer spaces to pique your imagination and also to hopefully give people more tools and skills to support and just be there for one another. So some of the stuff we have coming up, we have a 3 when conversation turns to suicide trainings. We have 3 offerings in June. So check that out in our newsletter for May. And those are 2-day trainings usually that like give people some practice at like initiating and staying in hard conversations around suicide. And I think if you have any interest to want to be a person to step into those more, like check them out. We also have a Voices and Unusual Beliefs training happening in August with Peter Bullimore and some other folks from the UK. So if you like a hearty British accent, you know, you'll get some of that action too. But in addition to that, it's also like giving people the imagination to sit with folks who have unusual beliefs or hear voices that other people don't hear. And that is also an experience that I think lands a lot of people in the criminal so-called justice system and in psychiatric holds. And it doesn't have to be that way, all right? So just having the imagination to say, like, I might not hear the voice that is giving you these thoughts and these words, but maybe I can connect with you to know that if they're scary words, if they're threatening words, that I know what fear is, I know what pain is, and so there are ways to connect in these moments, even if you don't share the experience. And then one last thing I'll share is that some awesome people on our team have started this thing called the anti-oppression training, which is a 3-day training where like we're digging right in to a lot of these systems that that really affect people, from white supremacy to ableism to sexism and trans misogyny, and just trying to figure out like what are these doing to our imagination, what are these doing to our relationships, and how can we unravel some of that. So that's happening in July, and I'm not someone who does that training, but I took it last year and it was really amazing. A lot of what we talk about too is in that training is like how do we work to interrupt things when they're happening, like how to be an active bystander, not just to like let these moments go by. And that's really helpful in public too, and actually it could be useful skills instead of calling the police. You know, right? You can just like learn how to interrupt some things in the moment if you feel safe to do that. So I just wanted to offer that, like, and I really appreciate Isabel talking about imagination, because I think it's like it's a resource that we can grow in ourselves, and we can grow together. And so if we know that there's a possibility to do things differently, then it's about people's willingness to step into that. And much like Daryl said, and Celeste said, and Isabel said, like, I hope that something of what we said will allow you to take a step further into doing something about white supremacy in this country, doing something about like why some people are have their rights taken away because they're different, they act differently than you, perhaps. So yeah, and thank you all for sticking around and listening. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you to all of our panelists, to all of our audience members, those who are especially still here, but also so much those who were here from the beginning. I now turn it back to AKINE, over to Natalie. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. I want to first say thank you to our wonderful panelists and moderator, Celeste. Thank you, Daryl, Sean, Isabel. These were compelling stories and super important, I think, for everyone who was here. This is actually our highest turnout for our AKINE event. So round of applause to you guys, because we are starting a movement and it's not slowing down for sure. I also want to thank Wildflower Alliance, formerly Inc., and Estoy Aquí. I want to make sure that everybody is in the chat. Make sure all the links are down there and click. And if you have any questions, we want to keep that available for everyone. We hope that you walk away knowing a bit more about peer-led alternatives to policing and the ways that it is possible in the city of Easthampton. This conversation is important as a first step in establishing a common language around what we mean when we say alternatives to policing and peer-led supports. We hope that city officials are also working towards understanding these terms so that we can have a meaningful conversation about how to make our city and community safer and more welcoming. In addition, given the conversations the Easthampton City Council is currently having relating to the mayor's use of force report, AKINE calls on Easthampton community organizations and committees to join us in solidarity and strongly urge the Easthampton City Council to vote to establish a committee that will work towards finding peer-led alternatives to policing in Easthampton. AKINE also asks Easthampton community organizations and committees to join us in pressuring the city council to look critically at and examine the scope and duties of the Easthampton Police Department with the goal of divesting a significant portion of the police budget for those funds to be reallocated to a more appropriate groups and agencies to perform those services. And again, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Have a good night.